right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session discussing the Dodson Research Grant and giving you some info. I'm Jesse Singleton. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Support at UTEP's Graduate School. Got some of the folks just jumping into our session here, so let's make sure I'll keep admitting people as we get started on our session. But thank you for joining us. Quick look around here, make sure I've got everybody we need. As we go through our session today, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. Let me know if you have any issues. I'll make sure I address those since we're in an all digital environment, but I'll be tracking that and answering them as we go. Feel free to make this a pretty informal session. I'm happy to stop as we go through and talk about something a little more specifically, things like that if you need me to, and there will be a spot for Q&A there at the end. We are going to be discussing a couple different things today in this info session. We're going to start off by talking about internal funding versus external funding opportunities to help you understand that, because it is something that's central to the Dodson Research Grant and the work that we're expecting you to do. And so I'm going to talk about that a bit. Then I'm going to go over the Dodson Research Grant overall and give you some space for any questions you might have in creating your application. So that's our goal for today, about 30 minutes, maybe a little more if you need it for questions. I'll be here for you. And I am recording the session, so if you want to revisit this later, I'll post this probably by the end of the week to our webpage, so you can go back and check this if you need to, or if maybe you have a colleague that's also wanting to apply but couldn't attend, you can encourage them to watch the session. If I can ask everyone to as we get started, to go ahead and scan this QR code and record your attendance, and I'll also put a link here in the chat that works the same way. Kind of a long link, but if you can please go ahead and record your attendance, that would really be helpful for us. We do track who attends our programs, and it also actually helpful for this one. So if we have directed feedback or directed follow-up related to your application, if I know you attended the info session, that's really helpful. So please go ahead and do that for me. I'll give us just a minute to, if you haven't yet, to go ahead and scan that or access the code and get logged in. And while we're doing that, again, start formulating those great questions as we go through the session today. All right, I'm gonna assume we're good on our attendance. Do you need to do attendance with both link and QR code? No. The link is, if you can't access the QR code, whichever one you prefer, either one will take you to the same place. Thank you for asking that question, David. All right. So getting into the session proper, we're going to start talking about internal versus external funding and the differences there to help you understand what we're doing here with the internal or the Dodson Research Grant, which is considered an internal funding source. And so if you aren't familiar with this distinction, internal funding is any fellowship, research, or teaching assistantship, stipends, grants, tuition assistance, anything that's funded directly by your university, right? The Dodson Research Grant is internal funding. The travel grant that we have that's coming up, it's going to open on October 1st. That is considered internal funding. If you're a doctoral student receiving doctoral tuition remission, that is considered internal funding. So we want to make sure that we cover that, because as part of your application into the Dodson Research Grant, you are expected to submit external funding. You're expected to pursue external funding, and so we want to clearly delineate that, right? And so other examples of internal funding would be if you're offered admission to a PhD program with a teaching assistantship. That again, that is internal funding. Things that cover all of your cost of attendance or basic living expenses that are provided directly by your institution are considered internal funding. Sorry, one second here, got a question. Perna, I see you're asking about the QR. I will catch up with you towards the end of the session, and I will send that to you by the link or the QR, so don't worry about that. Thank you for asking. Other things that related to internal funding, it is not just what's funded by your institution. This comes up, actually, we were discussing this recently in our grant writing skills series. Funding that is provided by your university, your program, your lab, or by UT system are all considered internal funding sources, right? External funding sources are a bit different. That is a fellowship, scholarship, or research grant that's awarded by someone from outside your institution, right? Example, this might be NSF, Rhodes Scholarship, Fulbright if you're wanting to study abroad. Let's say you're a member of a biological association and they have a grant that you can apply for as a student. That is external funding. National Institute of Health would be external funding. Any number of parties that are separate and outside of UTEP or the UT system are considered external funding, right? And I want to make sure I clearly delineate that as we go through and talk about the Dodson Research Grant. As one of the expectations is you're identifying what external funding are you also seeking during your grant period. And we do have a fair number of students that will indicate like, oh, I'm also going to ask the biology department to fund me. That is not external funding, that is internal funding. Or they will indicate that they are working under a grant with their PI. It's still considered internal funding because your PI has received that. We're looking for external funding that is a new application that you generate as a student to help fund your experience and your research. And I do want to clearly delineate that because it is something that you are evaluated on in your application. And sometimes it's misunderstood by our students. All right. Actually, I'll slide back really quickly there. If you want to know more about external funding and resources and how to locate that, if you look in the upper right-hand section of the PowerPoint, I do have a QR code that goes to our external funding page. We have a lot of resources already out there on our website that can help you locate that. And so as you're thinking about how you're putting this together for your Dodson application, please feel free and do use the resources we have on our external funding page to help you locate sources for external funding and also resources for how to help craft that application as you get farther into your process. But know that we've got that resource there. For internal funding, and this is an important one to know because when you want to apply for the Dodson Research Grant, you're going to need to navigate to our internal funding page. If you find this, if you go to the graduate school page, which is utep.edu/graduate, and then funding will take you over to our internal funding page, or you can navigate by looking at the drop-down menu for funding, and you see a couple different tabs there. We've got paying for graduate school, which is just great resources that I encourage you to check out. We have information on doctoral tuition remission, which is if you want to know if you're eligible or amounts and things like that. We do keep that information there. We have the external funding page, which I've mentioned, which links to the Pivot database for seeking funding, as well as some other resources, really good information there for you as well. There's information for our Mexican nationals who might be looking at CONACYT, that's that last link. And then there's the internal funding page specifically. And that is where the grant guidelines and information, as well as the link to the application for the Dodson Research Grant are stored. It is also where you find the travel grant. We're not talking about that one today. I'll do a separate info session for that, but just know that it's there if you want to review it. And so that is when you want to apply for the Dodson Research Grant, this is where you need to go. When you log into the, or not log in, when you click into the internal funding page, you'll see the Dodson listed and then a more information kind of drop down. When you click on that, it'll open up the guidelines and it'll have you all the information that you're seeking there, as well as the link. And so first step is making sure you can find it. And I'll go ahead and I'll drop this link into the chat so you can see it really quickly. So I've got it. Try to make it as available as I can. What is the research grant, though, that we're offering? And so if you're interested, you're here attending, you want to apply, you got to know what it's for and what it can and can't do for you. And so the Dodson Research Grant is open to students in all fields of study, and we do have students in all fields apply and receive the grant. We do see some students in certain fields are more successful at applying for the Dodson Research Grant, but it's because I feel like we have more applicants generally from those areas, and we're looking to actually increase our applications across a broad swath of students. And so anybody can apply if you're conducting research for this grant. It is funded from the Les and Harriet Dodson Endowment, which is an endowment that the President's Office for UTEP oversees. And so what happens essentially is every year, the graduate school writes a proposal to the the president's office requesting funding from the endowment, and then we use that to fund your research grants through this competitive application. We're not the only ones that receive Dodson endowment funding. We will have different offices and programs and different areas of the institution will request Dodson funding and use it for different things. But we typically use it for, and have always used it for, student research and to fund that. We also receive a pretty large chunk of the available Dodson funding each year because we do demonstrate that we are student focused and outcome focused with our funding dollars that we give to students, right? And so it's a pretty successful program with the graduate school that we like putting on for you all and hope that you find helpful. You are able to request up to $3,000 through the Dodson Research Grant. It doesn't have to be $3,000. You can request less. There isn't necessarily a tangible benefit for requesting less. We don't evaluate on a sliding scale for who we're funding, but I do encourage you to be specific about what you're asking for in your budget, and we'll get to budgets a little bit later. But if you don't need $3,000, if you need $2,500, indicating specifically where you're going to use that is going to give you a stronger budget. But you don't have to request less just to try and make yourself more competitive. You can request up to 3,000. It primarily assist students who are actively working on their dissertation or their thesis or a final project, as this is the students that are connecting most of the research and where it's designed to be used, although it can be used for other projects. You just have to justify that in your proposal to the faculty review committee. We find that majority of students that receive it, though, are in that active dissertation thesis final project stage. It is open to master's and doctoral students. I think our master's students are a little less successful in their applications than our doctoral students. I think that's a function of number of folks who apply and readiness to complete the grant application, to be honest. But we definitely do see master's students be very successful in the program. And so if you're a master's student, don't be put off or be intimidated about the application. Just make sure that you're putting forth a really strong effort and you'll be evaluated on the same scale as the doctoral students. And so we don't give preference one way or the other, but do know that it's open to you. We do see it as an excellent professional development opportunity to gain experience in grant writing for our students that participate. And so part of the benefit of the Dodson is the money you may receive as a recipient if you're successful, but also in just the process of going through and creating a grant submission, right? If you've not done this before or only done it a few times, this is a great way to get really good experience in a pretty safe environment. It's all staying internal to the institution. It's not going out to a major external funder like the National Science Foundation, where it may be more critical. You get that opportunity with almost like training wheels, right? Of riding a bike, of your institution's reviewing it. Everyone that submits a Dodson research grant and goes through the entire process, they receive feedback from the faculty review committees. And so you get a chance to kind of see, where you did well and where you could improve it. And that isn't always the case with external grants and major funders. So it's a great opportunity to really get a good solid foundation for when you start applying for larger grants, bigger external grants. And so we consider this kind of like a training grant. As you go through the presentation, you're going to see there are some pictures peppered in of students doing various forms of research. All of those folks are recipients of the Dodson grant, right? And so I like to include them in our presentation as part of the process of receiving a Dodson grant. Is at the end, you have to submit a closeout report, basically letting us know how it went. And part of that, I ask for folks to submit pictures of themselves at research in action, so we can kind of see how it went and get a sense of what they were doing. And it's always exciting to see those pictures. But you'll see folks in action doing research along the presentation, and they're doing a variety of things. Sometimes you'll see them in laboratory settings, sometimes you'll see them in the field, sometimes they're in archives, right? All of those things are acceptable with the research grant for the Dodson. And again, if you have questions throughout, drop them in the chat. I'll be happy to stop and answer those as we go through. So some examples of successful proposals. I think it's helpful to kind of talk about that. So I've kind of sampling here in different areas of folks that have applied and articulated their case well and been rewarded funding. And so one example is we had a student in the master's programming and engineering who used Dodson funds to develop a water filtration system for underdeveloped communities. This person also then took that research and wrote a pretty successful 3-minute thesis for a presentation to compete in our competition at the institution. It was exciting to see. We had a student in the doctoral program in Borderlands History in the College of Liberal Arts use funding to travel within the state and internationally to access archival database on binational water use. And so know that travel for research is possible with the Dodson Research Grant. We'll talk about what you can and can't do here in a little bit, but know that travel research related is possible and international travel is possible on the Dodson Research Grant. It's a big question we often get is, can I travel internationally? And the answer is yes. We do have a fair amount of students that will specifically apply to Dodson for international research travel because it is such a large expense, and this is a helpful way to do that. Another student we had that was successful was a doctoral student in ecology and evolutionary biology in the College of Science. That student used funding to travel to Africa to collect samples of a rare chameleon and then studied to gauge the impact on climate change. Really cool project there. And then a final one is a student in the international business and doctoral level in the College of Business Administration used the funding to purchase incentives to recruit participants for their research, right? Another big question we get is, can I use this to purchase some kind of incentive, a gift card or some other payment to someone to participate in my research, take a survey, do an interview, things like that. Yes, that is something that can be done. The guidelines on that, what you can and can't do for the funding, what we are able to do through using the $3,000 is we can cover travel for field research, right? I say that we can cover travel, and I want to caveat that and make sure you understand that you have to follow the university guidelines for travel in order to receive that funding. If you apply for the Dodson Research Grant, the faculty reviewers love your proposal. They decide to issue you the funding. We transfer it to your program, and you're approved through the grant to travel, let's say to an archive or something like that, or to a field station, and then you don't follow the travel process and try to get that funding back, you're going to have a very difficult time, if not be able to do it. And so know that we will fund travel, but being issued the grant is not a travel approval, right? It's us saying we like your research, we want to fund it, but you still have to follow all of the guidelines for fiscal purchasing with the institution for travel. So be aware of that and look at that very closely when you decide to apply. And what I will do really quickly here, I'm going to take just a pause here. I'm going to pull up the travel website. I'm going to put that into the chat here. So if you need to review that, you can. So give me 2 seconds to pull that up. What I'm providing here is the student travel page. It's important that you follow not only student travel guidelines, but also general university travel guidelines. And you can access the general travel guidelines from the student page. So that's the first thing. If you're thinking about travel, make sure as you're creating your proposal, you're reviewing the student travel guidelines and the general travel guidance before you start getting in too deep into your proposal to make sure that you can meet all the deadlines and processes, because you'll need to justify that in your budget and how you plan to use it for your reviewers to accept your proposal. Question here we see, ask what is included in travel, when you air travel, include lodging and or per diem. So essentially, if you are traveling for field research, as long as you put it into your budget, all things that are allowable under university travel can be reimbursed. Airfare is not a reimbursable expense, but you can purchase it through Anthony Travel in the institution. And then lodging is a reimbursable expense and per diem is a reimbursable expense. As long as you put those into your budget, that can be done through the Dodson Research Grant. And so again, review all of the guidelines on travel and purchasable items and how you navigate that purchase, right? The big one is airfare versus like a hotel or something like that, right? Or gas if you need to drive versus, airfare. The challenge with airfare is that it is not reimbursable. It has to be done through the university travel agent versus most other costs related to travel or reimburse expenses. And so you want to navigate that very carefully. Thank you for the question, Sam. I appreciate that. Other things that we can fund, usable lab materials, right? Sensors for, one-time use that someone is going to wear, right? If you see the research that's being done here by the folks on the treadmill, I believe this is in the kinesiology department, there's a sensor attached to that prosthetic leg and they're checking kind of the movement, right? That is something that was purchased with Dodson funds, and that's a usable sensor, right? Chemicals and things like that you may need, reagents for your things. Those are usable lab materials that you might need to purchase. Those are things that you can get with the Dodson Research Grant. Tests that you may need to send out for. So there are certain things on our institution that we are just not equipped to do for your research, and you need to send it out to a national or another laboratory. It's fairly common. Those are things that we can cover through the Dodson Research Grant. Participant incentives, we talked a bit about that. If you're doing research where you need to survey folks or conduct ethnographic interviews, participant incentives can be covered. Again, as long as you are purchasing them correctly through the university process and following your IRB approvals and all those things, we can cover those through the Dodson Research Grant. And then equipment that is less than $300, and this is one I'll cover a little bit more in depth, right? Because we are not able to cover anything that is considered a durable good over $300. And a durable good is an item that'll stay at the institution for more than a year, right? And so if you think about the picture we have here in the corner of them conducting research, right, that sensor is a non-durable good. It's a usable good. It may last for more than one session, right? But it's not long-term use, right? The treadmill is a durable good and costs more than $300. You can purchase the sensor, you cannot purchase the treadmill, right? And so you have to be aware of that. And there's a $300 limit on what we consider equipment. That's 10% of a total maximum grant. We set that as a standard because it mirrors what you would see in government grants, external grants. That kind of equipment guideline and 10% of total as far as what qualifies as equipment is what's usually in government grants. And so this is another way to help train you in thinking about grant funding. And so if you need something that is a durable good that's less than $300, that can be included. The caveat on equipment is if you need something that would qualify as equipment over $300 in a durable good, you can put that into your proposal as long as you take special care to justify that and why that purchase is necessary, and you should be given an exemption by the faculty review committee. And if the faculty review committee says, you know what, they justified that well enough that we should invest in that item, we will provide the funding for you to do that. But generally speaking, equipment is non-allowable, so be very conscientious about how you do that. Things that you cannot purchase or hard lines cannot purchase with the Dodson Research Funds. Travel to conferences or trainings. This is not professional development funding, right? Even if you're going to present the research that you're doing on the Dodson grant, that is still professional development. For that, apply to our travel grant. If you are traveling to a conference or something else, trainings on something, can't cover it. If you need to pay assistance, that cannot be covered. Going back to the example of the person that was going to Africa to collect chameleons and things like that, one of the questions they had was, can I pay someone to assist me with collecting these chameleons? And the answer is no, we cannot pay that. We can pay for the other things, but we can't pay for the wages to an assistant. So you have to be mindful of that. It does not cover your tuition. It is not that type of grant. And it does not cover wages for you. And so you can't pay yourself with the grant. And then again, the equipment standard, which I've already covered, so you all know that. So that's the general guidelines. If you're thinking about your budget and what you need to purchase, if you're not quite sure where you fall, what I encourage you to do is to email me and ask me this question, and I'm happy to consult and let you know where that may fall and give you guidance. And what I'll do really quickly here is I'm going to put in the chat here the email we use for all Dodson related communication. You can always email me directly and I'll answer that. But dodsongrad at utep.edu is where we do most of our communication around this. Still me that responds to it, but it keeps it all in one area so we know what's going on with that. So if you have questions about these things, if you're going to put together your budget, you're not sure, is this equipment, is it not? Can this be paid for? We've had some folks come up with some things that are a bit different we've not considered before. Someone recently in a Dodson cycle requested to see if we could pay for website hosting for their project. And that's something we were able to do, but had not been asked before. We had to look into it, right? If you have some of the things that just seem like they're a bit different than what we've normally done, or you don't see it represented here, ask me and I will look into it for you and get you an answer. So that's what we'll fund. Now let's get into how you actually apply and what you need to do for your application. Your proposal, project proposal, is a 3-page double-spaced document, and it needs to be written in clear, non-technical explanation of what you're planning to do. We want it written for an educated audience, but assume that the people you're writing for are not experts in your field. There is a faculty review committee that reviews all of your applications, and we do a double blind review. And so essentially, not sorry, not a double blind, just a double review. They will know who you are, but they'll have 2 faculty reviewing each person, and they will not be someone that's directly in your field of study. And that helps us prevent any bias that may happen, right? And so if you are in the laboratory sciences, maybe you're in chemistry, you won't have another person in chemistry reading it, but someone in biology may be reviewing it. So when you think about how you construct your proposal, you want to write it from a sense of they may not know all of the technical jargon that I know. So how do I make sure they can understand the research I'm doing, right? You want to make sure you provide a good description of the activities that you want to be funded and be very clear on that. Make sure there's a connection to your degree completion. That was something we'll be looking for. And then if you have applied and are applying a second time, you do need to acknowledge that and provide a justification on why you should receive funding a second time, whether that's for a new project or an extension of the current previously funded project. We do need that information. That is true whether you utilize the funding or not. And so we do have some folks that applied for the Dodson Research Grant, they were awarded the research grant, and then something happened. They were unable to use the funding, so they returned that. They notified us. That's okay. That happens. But you do need to just write in your justification of like, yes, I'd like to be funded a second time. So make sure you note that in your proposal. That is a 3-page double-spaced document. You also need an itemized budget and explanation for your proposed expenditures. I recommend a table outlining what you're going to purchase and then a justification for that. Again, just providing a table is not going to be enough. The faculty reviewers want to dig in and really get a sense of how you're going to use this money. So they're going to want to see a clear table and then a justification of how you're using it. If you also include something that helps understand how you're making good use of money or finding ways to lower costs where you can, things like that, that's going to go a long way to showing that you are trying to make good use of the funding, and that will be good for your application. So that's my recommendation. Make sure you estimate when you plan to make purchases and indicate any other source of funding you may have, right? So let's say you are looking to conduct research and overall you know that you need about $6,000 to $7,000 in funding, and you want $3,000 to cover Dodson, of the Dodson to cover certain sections. You want to give an idea to the reviewer where the other $3,000 to $4,000 is coming from. Because if they want to fund you, they want to know that you're going to be able to do the project, right? If you're like, I need $7,000 in funding, I need 3 from you, and I don't know where I'm getting the other 4, that's going to be hard for them to give you a high score on your overall application in your funding section, because it's really difficult for us to know if you'll actually be able to utilize the funding, because it's contingent on that other source coming through and you haven't identified it, right? So talk about that in your proposal. And then very, very key, very important. And this was new for last year, and it is true for this year as well. There's a change in the Dodson grant. All funding that you are given for the Dodson Research Grant must be utilized by July 2025 within the fiscal year that you're issued it, right? And the fiscal year for the university essentially runs from September through end of July, right? Um, we then, at the end of July, moving into August, purchasing starts to shut down at the institution. It kind of has a tiered process of how it shuts down, but they basically go into the end of year processing and it's not possible to make purchases anymore. And if you were issued Dodson funding and you don't utilize it by the end of the fiscal year, that money gets swept and returned to the president's office and the endowment. It's not something that we at the graduate school have control over. And so if you're approved to make purchases and you are awarded the funding, we love your research, and you don't complete that by the time it's swept, that money is gone. And we cannot get it back. We can't reissue it to you. Every year we request a new pot of money from the university, and we can't go back and then reissue you the funding, because then we're essentially funding you twice, right? And so please be very conscious of, when you put together your application, let us know how you'll ensure that you'll spend the funding by July 2025. And if you're not confident you can do that, consider applying next year, right? If you're expecting that your major purchases will happen in, November 2025, then maybe the next cycle when you want to apply. Additional things that you may need to include in your proposal: if you need IRB approval for your project, include that. You can include your letter from IRB. That does not count towards your 3-page limit. That's just something you include as an extra document. But if you need IRB approval and you have it, include it. If you need IRB approval, but you haven't received it yet, let us know in the narrative where you're at in that process. You do not have to already have received IRB approval to be awarded. You can be in the process of or indicate plans to apply to the Institutional Review Board. And if you're not familiar, the Institutional Review Board essentially is the office that gives you approval to do research involving human test subjects, right? There's a separate one for animal testing. Either one of those, you need the approval in order to receive your funding. If you have not received IRB fund approval yet and you were awarded, the graduate school and your program will not allow you to spend the funding until you actually receive formal approval from IRB. And so let's say you are planning on doing research into, say you're in kinesiology and you're doing something related to movement and falls, right? And how someone moves. And you need IRB approval for that. You write your application, you indicate you're in process, your research is great, the faculty reviewers say it's great, we issue you a reward letter and you get your funding transferred to your program. You won't be able to spend that money and get your participant compensation or your sensors or anything like that until you've submitted fully through IRB, gotten the letter back that you're approved. So know that that is part of our process. We do ask you to give us indications of where you want to apply for external funding. I mentioned this at the top of our presentation. That's very important. Part of what we talk to the president's office about in our request is that the Dodson Research Grant will lead to a couple different outcomes. One, it will lead to increased student success and matriculation from their master's programs and completion of doctoral programs. It will lead to additional publishing of scholarly articles. It will lead to greater professional development through engagement in conferences. And it will also lead to more seeking of external funding by our students, right? These are things that we tell the president's office we're going to be working with you all on and want you to achieve if we've awarded you the grant. So it's very important that you do follow through on an external funding application during your Dodson grant period. To that effect, you need to tell us, what are you going to apply for? And again, if you put on there the biology department as your external funding source, that will not qualify, and that will get you dinged on the application by the faculty reviewer. So be thinking now, be searching pivot, be thinking about, what else am I going to apply for? And indicating I'm not going to apply for is going to be a problem, right? And so think about that and what you may want to be doing. And if your research will be fully funded, right? And let's say your tuition is fully funded already, then think about, what external funding are you going to apply for to go to a conference, right? What other external funding might you apply for, right? You need to get creative. If you are lucky enough to be fully funded, which is fantastic, love it. Um, Find other ways to seek external funding. And so a travel grant may be a way to do that. And again, the travel grant with the graduate school does not qualify. That is internal funding. You will be asked to include the latest copy of your individualized development plan, your IDP. And if you are not familiar with an IDP, or you need a refresher on how to craft a really well-written one, we do have an IDP session on our workshops and events page that is recently recorded, and can help you out with that. And I will tell you that the IDP is sometimes not given the attention I think it needs in the applications, and is sometimes the difference between someone receiving funding and someone not. And so make sure you have a good quality document there. I see you have a question here, so I'll take a quick pause. Question is, does it make your application stronger if you indicate plans to apply for external funding? If you have a really solid plan for external funding, that does make your application stronger. If you have a weak plan for seeking external funding, or you don't provide a plan for external funding, it will make your overall application weaker with the faculty reviewers. And in a few slides, I'll actually show you the rubric that the faculty reviewers use, and you can see how that impacts your overall score. So you can be conscious of that. So we will talk about that a little bit more, but that's a great question. Thank you. The individualized development plan is also on a scored portion of your application. And what we look for on that is really solid goal setting and reflection by you, but also feedback and engagement by your mentor. And too often we'll get documents that students kind of really quickly rush through. The goal setting isn't very strong. There's no feedback by the mentor. It's technically part, of your application. You've submitted it, you've checked that box, but it's going to be scored lower. And that is going to potentially sometimes be the difference between someone that gets funded and doesn't. When we have them very close in score, the quality of their research proposal and their external funding plan is about the same. And one person has really well thought out goals, really strong personal reflection on their IDP, on their progress, and their mentor has shown engagement in the comment section of the IDP, versus someone that their goals are finish dissertation, get a job, and then mentor signed it and they submitted it. The person with the well-developed IDP is going to get the funding. And so do not let that be an afterthought. And again, if you need help on creating a good document, we have some guidance out there through our workshops that can help you with that. And then the last piece is a faculty mentor letter of support. That is not something that you directly submit. Once you submit your application, we will send out a request to your mentor to send that back to us. And then we package that as part of your review. We also, the faculty reviewers will evaluate the strength of that letter of support as well. And so it is not a checkbox either. And so do talk to your mentor and let them know that you're applying. Let them know what your project is, what you're seeking for, so that they can write a really strong letter of support for you. But know that that's not something you need to take care of, right? We will manage that. If we have not received your letter by the time the application closes, and then we have like about a week period where we're in collection of letter process, I will let you know and ask you to follow up with your mentor. So typically I'll send them an email, and then if I don't hear back, I'll send them a follow-up and let you know, like, hey, talk to your mentor. They may have missed my email. Make sure they submit the letter, and we typically get them all back. If your faculty does not submit your letter of support, it's difficult for us to send your application to the faculty review committee because it's kind of an incomplete application at that point. And so do make sure you're talking with them about this so they know to expect it. All right, process. So how are we reviewing your application? And so it is an online application process through Question Pro. You'll find that application on the internal funding page. We have one cycle per year. And the deadlines for that are outdated. I apologize. We are open right now, and we will close that on double check my deadlines for that. I apologize on that. Sure I give you the correct ones. So we will close that on October 15th. We actually opened the application much earlier this year. We wanted to get it open as quickly as possible. We are still actually in the process of our review with the president's office to know how much funding we will receive, which determines how many grants we can give. In the past, we've waited till we got our letter, which is in November. But we are going to give you as much time as possible with your funding by opening it earlier. And so we opened on September 15th. We will move through October 15th in the application collection phase. And then again, you must spend your funds by July 2025. Once you submit your application to us, and then once the application process closes in mid-October, we then package all of the materials and we send them to a faculty review committee. Again, each person gets 2 faculty reviewers. They will review, score your application, and then get it back to us, and then we'll determine who is fundable based on those scores. If you are funded, you'll receive notification and a acceptance of award letter that you return to us. If you are not funded, you'll receive a notification and some feedback so you can apply again in the future, and we encourage you to do that. And I do see folks apply a second time, and we have students successful in those second attempts using that feedback, which is great. If you're awarded, we then transfer the funding. Once you've signed your letter and all the processes are done, we transfer the funding to your program, and then you work directly with your program to spend the funds. You also need to make sure you do the work, right? And so go conduct your research, spend the money, submit your external funding application you indicated you were doing. If your plans change and you want to submit a different funding application, that's fine. You're not tied to it. But we do ask that you can make sure you submit external funding. And then at the end of your period for your funding, which is in July 2025, you'll submit a closeout report, basically letting us know how it went, what funding you utilized, what research you conducted, how it impacted your overall experience at UTEP and your progress towards your degree. And then again, I love seeing those pictures of y'all in action that we can use to celebrate you all in your research. In that closeout report, these are the questions we specifically ask for: update on status of research, timeline on your degree completion or immediate post-graduation plans if you have graduated or will be graduating, any publications that are in progress, you submitted or accepted that have resulted from the Dodson Research Grant, right? So let us know how you're publishing this work. If you went to any conferences and presented or discussed your research related to Dodson, we want to know that. Give me those 3 pictures of you in action. You do need to include an itemized statement of how you utilized your grant. I encourage you to keep records for yourself and then also work with your departmental admin to kind of audit that. And then an explanation of how funds contribute to your overall progress towards your professional and academic goals. And so that information is really, really key to us because we use all of your closeout report data to write our closeout report to the president's office. And so every year in the summer, I write a report to the president's office celebrating all the work that you did and letting them know how we utilized the funding they gave us. And that in turn helps us then create my request to keep getting funding for you all. And so your closeout report allows me to show that we met the goals and the objectives we were saying we were going to do for students to support them, so we can continue to get more funding for you all as doctoral and master's students for your research. So the closeout report, very key for that. If you want to keep being able to give the Dodson grant, I can have really good closeout reports. And by and large, you all do a great job with that. The close out report is also a really great training moment because most grants you'll get in the future, those big when you grants when you are successful professionals and postdocs and researchers and things like that, and you're applying for these grants, there's going to be some kind of follow up you have to write to explain how did you do the research, how did you utilize the funding, right? And this gives you an opportunity to practice that feedback loop, right? That you'll need to get good at. And it can be a little more challenging than you expect when you think about reflecting back on your experience. So it's a great way to do that. This is the rubric that we use. It is overall scored on 20 points. We evaluate on your proposal content overall, your writing clarity, and your budget, and your IDP. Those are all scored um, 0 through 4 in your overall scoring. And then your letter of support and your external funding plan, 0 through 2. And that gives us an idea of where you fit overall. And so, and then there's, again, space for constructive feedback to be given to the student. This is the rubric that is given to the faculty committee and they will use. And so that's the things that you want to write towards, right? So you want to make sure that you have good, solid content they understand, that your writing is clear, right? And there's a difference between your writing clarity and your proposal content, right? You might have someone that their writing is amazing, but they don't really actually articulate their project well, or don't show the value of their research, right? And they're going to have a struggle to be funded. You may have someone that is able to demonstrate really important research, but their writing is so obtuse that the reviewer has a hard time getting through it, and that affects their score, right? And you see the budget is a huge portion as well. We'll have folks that they have really clear proposals, doing really exciting research, but then their budget doesn't articulate how they're going to spend the money or the plan on when they'll spend the money. And it's very difficult for a reviewer to then fund you at that point if they don't know how and when you'll spend your funding, right? And so you're not seen as a safe bet, right? And then the IDP, as I mentioned, is a scored portion, and you can see kind of how we review that. And so make sure you're doing all of those things in your proposal. Some tips and tricks to help you be successful. I know I'm going a bit longer than I anticipated on this, but I appreciate you being here for it. The first one is attend the Dodson info session. Check mark. You've all done that. Thank you for being here on the session today. Hopefully you found it helpful. Do make sure that you seek feedback on your draft essays from your professors, mentors, research advisors. Maybe make a stop over to the University Writing Center. Our QR code is right there. Have them review it. It's only a 3-page document, so they definitely have time to help you with that. Make sure you're getting that feedback, looking for errors, but also looking at readability. The University Writing Center might be a great stop for that because you can talk to someone who is educated but may not be a research scientist, right? And so they'll give you a perspective of, is this something that a lay audience understands, right? See the deadline to apply. Deadline to apply is October 15th. I'll put this in the chat as well. So you got it. Question about, can it cover publication costs? It cannot. The Dodson cannot cover publication costs. Good question, so. A couple more questions. Latest date to submit IRB approval. So you do not have to be approved to apply. You can indicate in your proposal your plans to apply for IRB. You have to be approved by IRB to actually spend your money. And so if we love your research and we give you $3,000 and you haven't got IRB approval yet, you can't spend that money until you get it. So the latest date to submit IRB approval, I would say, would be July 20th. So you can spend it within 5 days, right? That's a terrible plan. Don't do that. But essentially you have your entire grant period to finish the IRB if you need it, as long as you have a plan to spend the money. Other tips, again, use the Writing Center. It covers a lot of different things. Revise, revise, revise. Use your time. There's a 30-day window for this application to be submitted. Know that I will be sweating bullets the entire time waiting to see all your applications come in, because they always come in on the last day, and that's okay. I'll be sitting with like 5 applications until the last day, and then boom, I've got 45 applications. That's because I know you're all using your time to review it, revise it, get feedback, use that time, but make sure you do submit it on time. And then give your faculty or mentor plenty of time and materials to write a strong letter of support for you, right? Make sure you're giving them what they need so that we can get that information and they can submit your letter. So that is the front and back Dodson Research Grant and how you can apply for it. I know we've had some questions already submitted in the chat, and thank you for submitting those as we go along. I will now take any time for any other questions you might have and make sure we get those answered for you. So feel free to drop those in the chat, come off mute, any of those are fine. Question is, can our external funding be a dissertation fellowship? Yes, yes, it can. If that's supporting you in your overall goals and it's an external funder, that counts. So asking about the attendance link. Yes, I can absolutely put that in there again. Thank you for asking for that. Let me go ahead and grab that. If you dropped in a little bit later, here's the link for attendance. Please make sure you let me know you attended. We had 26 people on, so hopefully I got 26 people on the attendance link. Thank you for asking that, Rebecca. Other questions? And I'm going to drop the Dodson email in the chat one more time for you. If you can't think of a question right now, I'm sure you might have questions later. Reach out to me, ask me these questions, give me a call. I'll give my office line here as well. That's my office number. That's the email for Dodson. Either one of those, reach out and we're happy to answer those questions for you. And we'll be happy to help you navigate this. Question here from David, do you prioritize a type of research? We don't. All research is treated the same in the process. What I will tell you is when I look at we did like an analysis of the last 10 years of the Dodson Research Grant. And I found that the folks from the College of Liberal Arts and the College of Science are my most successful applicants. However, I also found that my most frequent applicants are from the College of Science and the College of Liberal Arts, right? Particularly in the fields of chemistry and psychology. It's not that their research is more prioritized. It's just that for whatever reason, students in those programs apply in larger quantities, right? And so it's a numbers game there, right? The more of them apply, the more of them are awarded. I would love to see more applications from engineering, some applications from pharmacy, right? That might be a tough one because I don't think pharmacy does a whole lot of research, but I've seen a couple applications from there. But if I only get one application from pharmacy every 2 years, right, they're going to be less awardees from pharmacy. But everybody is the same. And you do have reviewers that are in your generalized area, right? And so if you are, let's say you are a history PhD, I will not have someone in chemistry reviewing your application, right? I will put someone that is tangentially related to what you're doing in your area, so they have some knowledge in your field, right? So if you're in history, you might have someone from psychology reviewing you, right? If you're in psychology, you might have someone from history, right? But you also might have more research scientists because there's that more of like a research base in psychology. But everybody is included. Good question about when we will notify applicants. And so we try to get notification to students within 6 weeks. However, it depends on a couple different factors, right? Actually, that timeline will be a bit longer because I've opened the application sooner. And so we are closing the application October 15. I may not know until mid-November how much funding the president's office will give us for the Dodson. I will take your applications and I will get them out to faculty reviewers as soon as possible and before we even have that notification. But that may slow us down a little bit, right? I have to know from the president's office before I can issue funding. It also depends on when the faculty reviewers do the reviews back to us. And so I try to give them about 4 weeks to review your applications. But if they need a bit more time, that pushes back the deadline for notification. My goal would be to notify you all in an ideal world by mid-November, right? So that graduate school gets a notification from the president's office, you've been funded, and then in a very short time window, I can turn that around and send you the notification. But that does depend on all the reviews coming back from the faculty reviewers in a timely manner. Question about short summary of requirements of the application. I sure can. Let me jump back to that. So overall components you'll need for your application is there's a project proposal that is 3 pages, written in a clear, non-technical way. You need an itemized budget that includes a table of your purchases and a budget justification. If you are seeking IRB approval and you already have it, upload that as your letter. Or if you know you'll need IRB approval, discuss your plans for IRB approval in your narrative if you haven't gotten it yet. You'll need to include your plan for external funding. And we do have a spot where you ask you to like send a link to like the funder's website or something like that so the faculty reviewer can see it. You'll need your latest individualized development plan. And then there's a faculty mentor letter of support. Again, we request that. So just know that we will ask for that and include it in your application. Everything else you upload, the letter of support we request, and then we upload on your behalf. And that is the overall requirements for the application. Any other questions? These are great questions, by the way. Thank you. All right, it seems like we've run through our questions, which is great. Thank you all for asking them, and thank you all for hanging out with the session today. Again, email Dodson grad, give me a call as you go through the process. We will be happy to help you all with that. The deadline to apply is October 15th. I will drop one more time so you've got it, the internal funding page link here. This is where you can find all the guidelines, things we talked about today, as well as the application to apply. Get out there, start working on your application, do submit it. The last thing I will say is, again, it is due on the 15th. And be very careful about when you apply, when you start going in to submit your application. Every year I have someone that applies or tries to submit their application right literally at the last minute that the application is open, and then it comes through as incomplete. And so do take all of your time, but don't submit it literally at the last minute. You might run into some technical errors. So I encourage you, if you're going to take that extra review early in the day, not late in the day type of thing. I will hang around for a little bit longer until everyone exits. And so if you have a question you want to ask a bit more in a one-on-one setting or a small group setting, I'll be happy to do that. Otherwise, that's the end of our session, and I appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you.